Mike, we've played the new Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Absolutely have, for about 3 hours.
About 3 hours, absolutely ages. Look at the gleam in this man's eye. His childhood has become high definition.
It's exactly how I remember it, but all the gaps in my imagination have now been filled with beautiful 4K visuals.
Mike is through the Matrix.
I really
The good
am,
news
yeah.
is that because we've played it for so long, we've actually noticed some fairly massive changes from the original, beyond the obvious visual upgrades.
Yes.
But, Mike, the good news is that they actually make perfect sense, don't
They really do, yes, yeah. They are logical for this new wholesale remake of your favourite game, my favourite game.
Here are the changes.
Everyone's favourite game.
Officially everyone's favourite game.
Don't try and deny it.
Get him.
Summons.
Yes.
Summons are a big part of combat in Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
You summon something the size of a god, and there's a little cutscene, and it comes
And it
down
was
from a planet.
always inevitably totally badass.
Yeah. How have they kept that badass?
Well, the reason it's improved, I would say, actually, over the original is that when you did a summon in the original, it was an amazing cutscene and you saw this awesome attack, basically, but then it was all gone and that was it. Whereas in the new game, because it's got this kind of live, active battle sort of thing, when you summon a Ifrit or Shiva or whoever, they actually fight alongside you. And they're kind of doing their own thing, and you can't boss them around in the same way that you can boss around your own characters. So they kind of come in and they're this sort of force of nature almost, and they're smashing stuff around. And so they stick around for quite a while, and it's really cool to be kind of fighting alongside these giant gods. Ifrit looks exactly as awesome as he used to. He's the size of like a small building, and he's there wailing on the bad guys. But you still also, because you can have your cake and eat it, when they finally leave, because they only stick around for a certain amount of the battle, when they leave, they do a devastating sort of big show-stopping attack before they leave. Which is a lot more like you'd remember from the original game.
And I think, am I right in thinking that while they are there, you can issue them commands, right?
Yeah, so they'll have a couple of attacks at your disposal. So you can ask them to do attacks, and they do that stuff, but you don't have the kind of level of micromanagement and sort of character switching that you would have with your party members.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Why don't you lead the way?
But you can influence what they will do, but quite a lot of the battle they'll just be off raging, basically,
like,
absolutely raging.
Who is Ifrit to answer to a mere mortal?
I know, quite.
Such as you.
I mean, even just the size difference, like would you know, if someone that tall was telling you what to do, seems unlikely that you'd do it. You'd probably not do it just to spite them.
I'd say we'll talk about it, but I have more questions.
Like, why are you
Where are you
only
from?
6 inches tall?
How did it happen to you?
Are you a borrower? So many questions.
Kinda scary, huh?
It's all in the mind.
Now, obviously, you've just seen a lot of very exciting summons combat, but I want to slow things right down
Let's
by
make it
talking
a
about
lot less exciting.
A lot less exciting. Let's talk about the nitty-gritty, behind-the-scenes Materia stuff.
Yes.
Remind me what Materia is, Mike.
So Materia is the way in which you customize your character's abilities in combat. All these little kind of colored gems represent different powers, and they can be kind of inserted into your weapons and accessories.
Yeah.
And depending on which ones you have in those weapons and accessories per character, determines what they're capable of doing in combat, and also various other buffs.
Sure.
But the difference here is that obviously there's an increased emphasis on like live action combat. So they've also added a bunch more materia. It's not just the original collection of materia that you had in the original game. They're all there as well, but you also have other additional materia that you can use that will have an effect when you're in active battle. One of the ones we got to play with is called Deadly Dodge, which is quite nice, and basically it's a very sort of, it's like a classic sort of action game ability. You get it in like Jedi Fallen Order, for example, but basically what it does is if you dodge out of the way of an attack, and then you follow up with an attack, it's a more powerful counter.
Okay, nice.
So that's just one example of a sort of piece of materia that you can pop into your weapon or accessory, and that will change your abilities in those kind of active
So if you
battles.
are the kind of player who actually is pretty nifty with like action-based, non-turn-based combat, you could theoretically build a team materia-wise around rewarding things like blocks and like, good deflects and
you can
dodges
definitely
and things
spec
like
to
that.
emphasize that stuff. I mean, obviously the game is set up so you can play it in a sort of classic mode, which is entirely turn-based.
Yeah.
I don't think you could go the other direction. I don't think you could play the entire thing in active combat because you still have to select spells and things, there's no way you're going to be able to beat these bosses just by hitting them.
But if you didn't do that, you wouldn't get the cool bits of slow motion.
Well, exactly, yeah. And the slow motion stuff is fun. It's really, really cool, particularly when you do it just at the point where you're about to be hit in the face with a giant laser and you're like, well, I've timed this. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, record scratch.
Yeah.
Just shoot!
We also saw that if you combine the materia, like an elemental materia like fire or ice or wind or whatever, with the materia called elemental, in the previous game that would make you resistant to certain elemental attacks. In this game, if you do it, it also adds a buff to your weapon, for example, if you put it in a weapon, that works in combat. So you can add like fire materia and elemental materia to the Buster Sword, to Cloud's sword, and when you hit things, you'll do fire damage as well. So that's another way that the sort of materia has been modified to take advantage of the active battle stuff.
Sounded like a very fancy way of saying you can make your sword go on fire.
You can make your sword go on fire.
Barret, Cloud, over here! It looks like a few of its components are still in transit.
We'll see about that.
Could tamper a little with its loadout.
And give ourselves an edge?
There should be a console somewhere.
One of the things I thought was quite cool is obviously a lot of the enemies you'll face. I mean, we played against a couple of big bosses in the new segments that we played, one of which was the Airbuster, who's the classic,
boss from the game.
Hovercraft robot with big fists.
I'm reliably informed.
And also Abzu, the gross thing that lives underneath the Don Corneo's mansion.
Yeah.
Don't want to know. But the Airbuster, I was fascinated by how they modified that for the new game to add a bit of depth to it. So you place the explosives in the reactor, similar to in the first reactor that you go to in the original game. But on the way out, you can actually sort of hack the boss fight, which is quite a cool touch. So what happens is you're going up through the reactor and fighting your way through various enemies. But in certain rooms, you can use these single-use keycards to remove abilities from the boss so that it uses them less frequently. So we decided to, take away some of its big bomber ability, which is the one where it drops explosives on you, because I had horrible, horrible memories of that the first time around. So I was like, remove all of those. And that's how we chose to do it. But you can also change the speed at which it moves around the arena by reducing its ability there. And it was just really nice, it was a nice twist on a boss fight that could have felt very, very similar.
Programming core flag for disposal.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Particularly because the Airbuster takes place in quite a small arena. It's in that sort of T-shaped walkway that you'll remember from the original game. And so you don't have a lot of space to move around. So actually, it's kind of fun that you can change that up in this new version. So I just thought that was quite a nice touch. It's not something they needed to do, but it kind of demonstrates that they're really looking at every single element of this game and how to kind of modernize it or make it more interesting and make it, less repetitive, I guess.
I really enjoyed that section because it felt like it was really narratively and dramatically amping up to that boss fight. It felt like an amazing prelude to the boss, because although at every stage you are weakening the boss and you're choosing exactly how to weaken it, you are all the time
getting
looking
more
at
and more
these
tense.
Yeah, looking at these schematics of the thing, and
they're talking about as you run into the room, they're like, we're 70% ready to launch or something, or 60% ready to launch. Yeah. And you know that they're racing to get the boss ready to fight you, and you're racing to try to take it apart as you get there, and you finally have this confrontation.
The Final Fantasy VII boss fights have always been epic and epically long, and they are still epically long, folks.
Yeah.
Trust me.
It's tense. When you're doing the active combat, you're trying to think tactically, like you would in a traditional Final Fantasy turn-based thing, and you're trying to make the most of your time units and things like that. But you're also trying to avoid getting hit in the face and, actively dodge things and try and get hits in. The bosses take about the same amount of time, but you're constantly working. You're constantly doing stuff. Obviously, if you play classic mode, I'm sure it's balanced for that. But
I wouldn't want to play a classic mode, though. I was enjoying the act of sort of fighting, but also skimming the screen to see when a bar's full up.
Yeah, exactly. And
you need
work out what abilities you have and who's vulnerable and whose health is dropping low, and it's like spinning plates, but the best kind of spinning plates. And when we played, we got really close to being defeated by the Airbuster.
Yeah.
But we got him.
We got it. I was incredibly glad that we did, because, man, I would not have wanted to watch you do that boss fight again. It was like 25 minutes long.
It took a while.
Yeah. Victory snatched from the jaws of defeat.
For once.
So what's Soldier Boy's deal? Is he one of us now? He's got balls, this, what was his name again?
Cloud Strife.
Right.
And he isn't a soldier anymore. Still, he's a professional, unlike the rest of us. I'm glad to have him.
This is a one-time gig. When it's done, we're done.
Final Fantasy VII has some of the most iconic characters in video game
Yes.
history. Obviously, it's always risky to put new dialogue in those characters' mouths. How did you feel it handled it?
I think it's like pretty successful from what we've played. They've really fleshed out the characters. I mean, it helps that they are beautifully rendered, you know, like more realistic looking people rather than the little sort of Lego people that they were in the original game. But I do think there is a danger that we will maybe become even more attached to these characters because you can see the hope in their eyes and things like that.
Oh no!
Yeah, right.
Don't make me hope.
Given that I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this game is a game that is not shy of killing characters, like legendarily, I think it's gonna be really, really tough. You know, if you're getting really attached to these characters, if you're catching feelings, it could be quite bad. But I like to give an example. Like the Avalanche crew are like much more fleshed out. You do a lot of chatting to Jessie in the original game, but she's got even more dialogue now, and it's a bit more. You know, you just feel a bit more connected when you see, you know, human emotions on the face of even like a sort of virtual character. So
Yeah.
I think I'm worried that I'm going to get really, really close to some characters and they're going to be mercilessly killed off.
There, Mike.
It'll be bad.
Did that feel better when I said there?
Not really. No, it's still going to happen probably. But yeah,
Need to work on
as
my
to
counselling.
Yeah. Luke is not a licensed
How about
therapist.
this? there?
Yeah, better.
I thought the voice acting seemed really strong.
It's great actually, and you know, I think.
Or at least not a catastrophe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think Barrett's the one that could have been like a total disaster because his dialogue is fairly extreme in the original game, but they've
Yeah.
actually managed to turn him into something that feels like a somewhat plausible character.
Yeah.
You gonna stand there and pretend you can't hear the planet crying out in pain? I know you can!
You really hear that?
Damn straight I do!
Get help.
Say that again!
Well, and I like that he has a bit of a. You really get the sense that arc when at the beginning he's like kind of pissy with Cloud.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
by the time we shifted to the reactor, you know, the airbuster fight reactor, they've got a bit more banter and they're a bit closer. I think, you know, it's nice to see that development.
Gonna make your eyeballs pop! You're up!
All set!
And I like as well his sort of strain of, I'm sure it was in the original game as well, but I like he was always willing to go off on one about like eco
Yeah,
matters.
he's an eco warrior. He's
an eco
the
warrior.
believer. Cloud's like the freelance employee who showed up to, you know, he's a merc
It's
basically.
like, hey man, I'm just here to debut
Yeah.
these trousers.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Whereas Barrett's the believer, he's the true believer.
The entire sector hazardous. Immediate evacuation is advised. If you observe any suspicious behavior, please inform the nearest public security officer.
One of the things about the original game that I think will always have tortured people who played it was obviously you get that amazing intro where you're sort of flown across Midgar, but you really only interact with the city in very limited, like fairly linear segments. When, you know, the point when Final Fantasy VII becomes sort of open world is after you've left Midgar and you never really return in the same way. But actually what I love about Remake is it really fleshes out all those sort of city streets that maybe you got a glimpse of in scenes or, you know, or as you're running to escape the reactor. And it actually, now you can poke around and there's chests and there's people to talk to and there's a real sense that it is a sort of fully functioning city. And I think that's, again, we're talking about like filling in the gaps in that your imagination had to fill when you were when you were playing it originally.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to be, you know, down on the ground in Midgar, looking up rather than at the top looking down.
Yes, very nicely put. I thought it was cool in the wake of the reactor explosion, walking through Midgar and like seeing all of these photorealistic citizens who are basically distraught at your, you know, at your actions.
Man, what a mess.
This game is basically, from what we can tell, going to be sort of disc one of the original game,
Yes,
which
right.
you know basically takes place almost entirely in Midgar. But it's great that even in these sort of opening sections, Midgar is fleshed out so much more, and I can't wait to see other locations like Wall Market and all these other, you know, Sector 7 slums and things like that, which are presumably going to be fleshed out in exactly the same way.
I did notice that as we were running around, like sometimes we would like head down a corridor or an alleyway or something just to see what was there, and you would kind of get out onto the other side and there was like nothing there, or maybe a chest. So I suspect it's not going to be like a proper open world kind of thing, is it? Like, it's still
going to be Skyrim, where there's a story around every corner.
It's still fairly linear. I felt like we were being managed through this path and encouraged not to deviate from what was clearly the objective.
Yeah.
But it's
a more expansive linear path.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big deal. You gotta pull back.
It's on you.
All right, watch and learn.
I've got to be honest, Mike, before we played the game, I was a little so-so on the combat, because I've always slightly bounced off turn-based combat, and the Final Fantasy combat, even when it's in like real time, it's never particularly appealed to me too much.
Yeah.
But by the end of our time with the game, which again was about 3 hours, I felt really, really in tune with the battle system, and it has some surprising depth, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. I played a bit of this at E3, and it was a very, very short demo, so I kind of got a feel for the combat, but not really, like you say, in tune with it. And I think my concern was that obviously they're balancing these two systems, which is the sort of turn-based stuff, which is the management of spells and potions and all this kind of stuff. But the way you kind of speed up the build-up of your time units or your action points or whatever you want to call them is by hitting an enemy. But my concern was that it would just be like literally you just mashing the button until the bar fills up, and then you're doing something.
And then you do something, and then you rinse and repeat.
Yeah, but what was quite refreshing, and I think this was particularly notable, there was a mini boss fight, and just the fact that they've added these sort of mini bosses that have their own fighting styles and things suggests that the combat is deep enough to sustain that sort of thing. But we came up against a guy called the Huntsman, and he had some particular things where you could block, and if you managed to block and hold block, you do a kind of automatic counter.
I see. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Which would then sort of break his guard and
turned
things
out
like
to be the trick to sort of defeat him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is that sort of depth to the action combat that makes it more than just mashing a button until a bar fills up, which was my concern. It's got a real kind of almost Devil May Cry vibe to it, and it's also just like super stylish. Like everything you do looks amazing. There'll be a bit where you're juggling one guy and then you've already switched direction and you're ready to hit the next guy, and just all the timings and things like that work really, really nicely. It's extremely satisfying. Apart from if you're playing as Aerith, at which point you're just waving a magic wand and shooting fairies out or something.
Oh yeah, that's right. Her animations are a little bit...
I mean, it's fine because that's
her vibe. That's her vibe.
She is the healer. She's a support class character. But I think they've kind of doubled down on that, and she feels like a support class character even in the live combat.
Yes, yeah,
so,
I know what you mean.
Which makes sense. So it's not going to change how you use her in your party, but it is funny to see her goal or her role in the party reflected in the sort of active combat.
In her animations. Final Fantasy VII has some of the best music ever committed to 3 discs. Was it 3 discs, the original game?
Yeah, the original game was 3 discs.
3 discs. So, it's got a lot of, many, many famous scores, and they have fundamentally changed the way that the music works, beyond just reorchestrating it.
Yeah, you had a minor freak out about this, and I totally understand why. Yeah.
I did, yeah. So basically the way it works now is in an area there's going to be like one persistent theme, and as you move from, for example, exploration to combat, that theme will be persistent, but it will be reorchestrated and sort of reimagined, and new instruments will come in. A little bit like the Monkey Island games.
Yes.
Sort of
the iMuse system was what it was called.
Which worked brilliantly, but
that's the reassuring thing.
It worked brilliantly, and the music was incredible and so bombastic and so swelling, and it's incredible. The way that they have reimagined the original themes, I think, is really,
sympathetic.
really, really strong.
Stop!
Get ready.
Avoid the plaza.
but I was a little nervy. The reason they did it is because they wanted to get rid of those gaps where there was basically no sound and you would jarringly sort of leave combat and go back to the overworld and the music would start up again, and they wanted everything to flow a little bit more. But, you know, the themes are the themes. I would like an option maybe to play it with the original.
With the original themes. They might do that. I mean, this is fan service, basically, first and foremost. But what I would say was it was quite nice when I was playing it because, you know, when it's playing a theme that's sort of there in the background, you don't really notice it so much. But then, obviously, the sort of bigger, more iconic melodies and things kick in, and then all of a sudden you notice it and the music's there. So it has a really nice rhythm to it, a nice sort of flow that works really, really well. And I was going in expecting it to be not jarring, but I was expecting it to be less emotive, I suppose, than hearing the original themes. But I think you just can't, you know, the amount of time you spend wandering around Midgar in the early part of the game, you can't just have a single theme playing throughout there anyway.
It's good enough in 1997.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the way the combat flows, you know, it's not like it's not that everything stops and you're in a fight. It needed to be somewhat dynamic, and I think they've handled it well.
A real subtle invitation.
We were gonna bring the trap anyway.
And I heard so many of the iconic themes coming through.
Sometimes from Barrett.
Yeah, occasionally from Barrett.
Development time in part 2 will be cut by just having Barrett hum all of
He'll
the
beatbox
music.
the entire
He'll beatbox
thing.
the entire score. So those are the biggest changes in Final Fantasy VII that end up making kind of like
Perfect sense.
Perfect sense. What the heck? Would you have any reservations about the game at this point, Mike, or are you just basically...
My main reservation is that I'm going to have to wait another 5 years for part 2, because this is episodic. And
Sure.
Granted, my favourite part of the original Final Fantasy VII is Disc 1 and all the stuff in Midgar. I absolutely adore it. But, you know, it's going to end, and I'm sure it will end on the dramatic climax of you escaping Midgar.
Yeah.
But then it'll be like, well, we'll be waiting until 2030 maybe or something before the next one.
Check back. We know that they've started development now. Like they're fully spun up on development of the second chapter. But I mean, gosh, it's such
ambitious.
an undertaking.
So it's like I was saying to you, Disc 1 stuff, it's all within Midgar, so there's a degree of kind of repeatable assets. It's the same sort of biome, it's a kind of urban environment. That
A couple of
thing.
reactors.
Yeah, reactors look the same. When it gets to Disc 2 and it opens out to the world and there's all these different diverse sort of places that you can go all at once, I think Part 2 is going to be an even more ambitious undertaking to create if they want to maintain that level of quality and the increase in density, which is the really staggering thing about the remake, of dialogue and the size of the areas and the sort of character development and all that kind of stuff. So that's my only reservation. I think the game itself, when it releases in April, is going to be essential for fans and probably just about essential for everyone else as well. So I'm not worried about it at all, but I am worried about how long I'm going to have to wait for the next bit.
All right, well, let us know what you think about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Are you excited? What have you thought of the sort of gameplay that you've been watching while we've been chatting? Let us know. Thank you very much, Mike, for guesting on this.
Thanks for letting me play Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Oh my God. Well, you're welcome, Mike. It's all up to me. Subscribe to Outside Xbox, where Mike lives, if you haven't already. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Hell yeah!
Maybe dial it back a little?